Hello, everyone. Welcome to the channel. This is our next segment of Scientology stories. No matter how you first heard about Scientology, we hope you will learn from these stories and that we can educate you in the language and practices of Scientology along the way. And for all of my guests, past, present, and future, I am very grateful for your courage and bravery in sharing these stories. It's my purpose to educate people as well as most of my guests, if not all. So we appreciate you being here. We appreciate you sharing, and we appreciate your support. And here's another important note I wanted to share before we get started for today. Whether you're currently in Scientology, an ex-Scientologist, or simply curious about hearing Scientology stories, the bottom line is Scientology does not want you to know about these. They are doing everything they can to stop us from sharing these stories. So again, we appreciate your support. Thank you for listening and sharing, and for helping us to educate people on the true nature of Scientology. With that, we will launch into our next segment. For today, we will be talking with Gary Morehead, who I know as Jackson, for part 2 of his Scientology story. So please help me welcome Jackson.
Hello.
Hi.
Here I am.
Welcome, Jackson. I appreciate you coming back.
Sure. I enjoy being here.
Awesome. And actually, before we get started with where we left off from our last episode, part 1, which I will include in the description to this video,
Okay.
I thought maybe we could touch upon what we didn't get to last time in regards to your mom. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I'll let you share what you would like to share or not for context, and we can go from there.
Okay. Well, I guess it was just over a week or so ago now, and I've been trying to figure out how to get in touch with my mom since 2009. The reason is because that's the last time I heard from her. When I called her, the probably a week after I finished doing my interviews with Joe Childs and Tom Tobin of the St. Pete's Times.
Understood, which is
For
now
the
Tampa Bay Times. Amazing series of articles, which again, I'll include the link to
Yeah,
those.
the Truth Rundown series.
Yes.
The first thing I did was I contacted my family members, my dad, my two sisters, and my mom.
Who are
Boy, I'm
all still Scientologists?
Yeah, and I gotta throw in here, Claire, because as I'm speaking this, and I think it's kind of important to let people know the reality of it, how real talking about something like this is, because in my mind right now, I'm taking into account the side effects of every word that I'm saying because of of who's watching, the OSA folks, and can I cuss on this without being edited?
Go right ahead. You know what? Some
Well,
topics just, it
you
comes
know,
with it. What can I say?
I'm sorry to say that the three greatest words in the English language, put in a phrase, is "go fuck yourself," because that really means a lot to say in that. Uh, as I'm sitting here trying to put together the memory of what happened when I last spoke to her and who I spoke with, Osa's taken notes of every particular to be able to either decipher or to jump on
Yeah.
what it is we
And
have to say.
for context, we're talking about the fact that Scientology made your family disconnect from you in
Right,
2009,
right.
14 years ago.
But what I've realized out of this is also didn't play your game because for everything we speak about, the quicker you respond and create an effect proves the craziness of the Scientology and the Sea Organization, particularly those that work in OSA and the fear factory that's at play, both physically and mentally, because you're fearful of Dave Miscavige hearing the fact that Jackson or Claire or Mark are talking to their family members who are Scientologists, and you don't, Dave would be upset at that, so you do everything that you can do to undo that
That's
or
right.
to
And
disrupt it.
and let's pause to note, in what world does $1 billion industry destroy families and use tax-exempt dollars to do so,
That's correct.
and then attack the people who are simply sharing their stories and their experiences, nothing else? Had this Our conversation has never and will never have anything to do with somebody's belief or lack thereof in Scientology. It's not
Right.
about that. It's about our experiences and what we lived through, right?
That's right. And simply telling the truth of the ugly underbelly of Scientology and this organization, because that's
That's
truly
right.
what it is. And to our viewing and listening audience here, um, I guess it's hard to swallow on one hand, but I'm willing to do it to take one for the team. But it's also still overridden by, I'm messing with other people's lives through some simply stated words. And that's all I'm doing is just talking about me wanting or having to talk to my mom or my sisters. Excuse me. So, um, who would, anyways, you explained who in their right mind would allow that. So,
Yeah.
um, I'm kind of, I guess, mentally debating what kind of details to speak of on this, but
And it's
nonetheless,
it's totally up to you. Whatever you want to share or not is
yeah,
completely
I'm not
fine with me.
afraid.
Yeah.
It's either I speak of apples and everything apples, or throwing some bananas in there too, and then knowing I'm throwing in those bananas, that's where Osa's going to work hard to get into the details. So, nonetheless, I guess in all honesty, the only person I've been trying to get a hold of is my mom, and Osa knows that I know how to find people, and because I spent a living doing it under Dave Miscavige's watch and command, so that's how I found my mom. It occurred during one of yours and Mark's little broadcasts, I think last week.
Yes.
I guess just in between stuff, I decided, hey, I'm going to try calling my mom. I don't even know what I tried doing it, but I did because I found where she was, and sure enough, she answered.
Wow.
And that was the episode where you guys had cut yourself off a half hour early and hadn't realized that you had. So, as yours was ending and transitioning over to Aaron's, is when I was having my conversation, and I was literally typing, "Hey guys, I'm just talking to my mom," and you guys
I
were off
know. I
air.
remember I was blown away. I was just,
Yeah,
my jaw hit the floor. I was like,
yeah,
oh my gosh,
yeah,
finally.
and it was really an interesting little thing because not having spoken to your, and I'm really trying to get rid of these uhs and ands, but speaking to your own parents, having, just now speaking to your parents after so long, not hearing their voice and their isms and the way in which they talk and they reference to stuff, it's like Mike and his blah, 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 right?
Right.
Well, I'm sure everyone has their own thing with their parents where they say certain things. Well, those things kind of become heightened. You become like sensitively aware, very sensitive awareness to those little things.
Yes.
And I
By
couldn't
virtue of
believe,
their absence, you mean?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
not having spoken to them in a long time, and you just grew up living with your parents, and you never even notice. Like, I'm sure most people don't even recognize how much. In my case, I noticed that my mom sounded like my sister, and the little phrases, because I was during the conversation, I go, "There's my mom, that's my mom," and she kind of was a little taken back by it, not in a negative way, but it's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, that's the stuff I remember about you, and it was just a natural
Wow.
development of the conversation." But she was more fixed on, "How'd you find me? How'd you find me? How'd you find me?"
Hmm.
And she's not in a good state right now, and I was kind of delicately dancing around of not going down a path of why haven't you called me,
Yeah.
um, because that wasn't the purpose of speaking to my mom. But nonetheless, I suddenly found myself in an arena of, what do I do? How do I do? What do I say? What do I not say?
Understood.
What do I want to know? What do I want to help care for her? because that's the last thing I was doing, was helping her navigate the lack of medical attention in the Sea Org, that they so much put little to no effort in caring for their own staff, that my mom was just left to waddle in her own physical ailments
Wow. Is
with
she
no
currently
direction.
still in the Sea
She's
organization?
not in the Sea Organization.
Okay.
I don't know when she left, but
Okay.
when I last spoke to her back in 2009, she was in the Sea Organization.
I see. So in the interim, somewhere in there, she's left.
Yeah, I had found out that she left, and yada yada yada. So, um, here I am talking to my mom, trying to quickly figure out, but not overwhelm her either, because she's laying in a facility bed, being looked after, and she's close to her 80s or in her 80s.
Boy.
It was awkward to hear that she could not remember my birthday,
Wow.
but she clearly could remember my sister's. But I was like, Mom, you don't remember my birthday? She goes, No, I don't. You're not even the month? Nope. I mean, that's, it's, I can make a deal out of it. I feel like I'm making a deal out of it, having been in the Sea Org in that toxic environment. You, our emotions have been categorized, so you no longer have any feeling attached to emotions.
Right.
So it also makes you feel awkward in that case, in that, why does this not have any feeling upon me or any impact on me? And then it takes a while and you start realizing, gosh, that's my mom. But
Right. I don't think speaking for myself, you become expert at compartmentalizing and shutting away your true feelings. Doesn't mean they're not
yeah,
there.
I know it's just weird. I mean, you at the same time don't want to be a little crybaby either. I mean, I don't know, what the hell am I trying to explain.
That's all
It,
right. You
it's
can let out whatever you want. It's
Yeah,
Trust me,
and
from my end, it's better to let it out than bottle it up because
well,
yeah. Ugh, I'm sorry. This is a
well,
lot.
it's I don't even know how to define it, Claire. It's like I'm trying to compose a logical sentence and convey the simplest how simple it was, but how significant and confusing, and I couldn't understand what was going on, and her fixation on trying to understand how it was I found her. And I just told her comically that, Mom, a magician never reveals his secrets.
Good one.
And yeah,
and
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 that just
how
stopped her in her
and
tracks.
yeah, and how bizarre. Your mom, her biggest question is, how did you find me? I mean,
That's
what
right. And I
in what
just
world? Only in Scientology.
only in
You seriously
Scientology.
cannot make this up. You just
That's right.
can't.
No, no, no. And in all honesty, I've already replaced my mom, if that makes sense.
It does. It sucks. It does, but I understand.
With
I
my with
I've
my dad's new wife, and she is such a fabulous woman. This such a classic mother. She
That's awesome.
bakes awesome. She's religious, but she will she will sit in a sailor's room and talk with the best of them. How's that?
That's awesome.
Yeah, and
And we call that family of choice. I think we
yeah,
all have
and
found our
I
family of
call her
choice, and there's
mom.
great importance to that.
Yeah, I openly have told her, and I even addressed the fact that my newfound family, her son and her daughter, and then their kids, I've been accepted into that family, and they all look at me that way. They know my history, they know there, and I've even individually expressed to them that I need no insult when they hear me refer to their mom as my mom, because, excuse me, I feel there's a sibling pecking order in this case, oddly, that I have to say that, just so I don't create any innocent disrespect, because that's another side effect from the Sea Org, or particularly the Int Base. You would tend to say stuff that, in your mind, you're not intending it to come across that way, but the listening ears take what you said as an insult.
Yes, you're
And
absolutely spot on.
yeah, it's a very displeasing side effect that I've lived the experience of. Is I've lost a lot of good people in my life simply because of what I said, and it being either misunderstood, which is my first thought that is what occurred, but more mispresented to them and miscommunicated to them of what it is I was trying to say. because we live such an open dialogue environment that we had no trouble talking about our personal lives and not thinking twice about it. Where,
True.
um, we used to talk about it. I mean, everybody got paid the same, so that was kind of an easy thing. How much are you getting for your Sea Org bonus this year? Everybody could tell. You do the math in your head how long they have been in the Sea Org, and
And for context, we're talking about every year in Scientology, there's a celebration of the anniversary of the creation of the Sea organization, which is, of course, the militant inner core of Scientology, where members commit to
right,
1 billion years that we've been talking about. And every day at Sea Org Day, the Sea organization members would get a bonus, which would increase annually for the years of service toward that 1 billion-year
I
commitment,
think it was
right?
only a fucking 10-year increase too. It wasn't something significant. So,
Yes.
um, but somebody who's been there 10 years versus your 5 years, they getting $50 more than you was. You like shaking hands with a billionaire, and I was just
Right.
a
And and
$100,000 man.
And do you remember what your last Sea Org bonus was, by the way, just for context? Ballpark, like
I
hundreds,
don't
thousands.
hundreds.
Yeah,
It was hundreds because it
for
was like
for for
17
for
or
your
18
total
years.
of how many years in the Sea organization?
Uh,
17 roughly, or
79 to 97, so that was almost 20 years. So that's 18 years,
yeah. So just
17,
for
18 years.
and again, just for context for the listeners, so for 18 years you got a few $100s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. For 18 years of service, that was the financial bonus that you always look forward to every year. And there was a year we didn't even get it.
Right.
And that's a topic that still can't believe to this day that none of us have openly talked about. And you tell me what day that would be, Claire. I'm going to see what day
Which
was a major change. Well, see, you weren't in gold when this happened.
yeah.
But
There's a
August 10th,
few significant dates that come to mind, but go ahead.
August 10th, 1990,
Yes, the flood.
the
We
flood.
yeah, I talked about that. I think we talked about that briefly, or maybe no, we didn't talk about that yet. Mark Fisher and I talked about that day. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, see,
And
I
yeah,
haven't listened to
I
those
wasn't
interviews.
there yet, but that was a significant date in the history.
Significant.
Yes.
That was a significant day for hundreds of people. And I'm
Yes.
not talking that, oh, that's the day I got a new wardrobe or I got a new pair of shoes or that's the first kiss on my date with my boyfriend.
No,
No,
this is
this
August
is
10th, 1990, when in the desert in Hemet, California, the
California.
headquarters flooded very badly,
We
but
had
more
a,
specifically and more infuriatingly so for David Miscavige, his berthing also flooded, which was
well,
blamed on all the base staff members, right?
well, the biggest thing was the effect that it had on where Tom was staying down
Tom
at the
Cruise was
G's.
he was
Yeah.
there at the time?
He was arriving soon.
I see.
and
Yes.
and it had basically flooded the building that he was going to stay in down at the G units, what we refer to as the G units, out on the what is that, the eastern end of the property.
Yes.
But that's a topic of another time. It just dawned on me yesterday that it's like, gosh, no one's ever dissected that major impact and changing hundreds of people's lives,
Yes.
because it was night and day. It was literally up until that afternoon muster down in MCI where he asked everybody to show up. And then just, I don't know if Mark told you this or even if he knows it, but when he was done tearing our new assholes, which is what he did, he tore our souls apart, literally, shock and awe. We'll get into that later. But when he was done with that, he left there and went up to the officers' lounge and played Nintendo games. That's yeah, and
Yeah,
that
epitomizes his hypocrisy right there,
yeah,
and
totally,
yeah,
totally,
just ruined
yeah.
hundreds of lives and goes off to play Nintendo.
Consciously, I mean, he knowingly did what he did.
Yeah,
Ruined our lives.
yeah,
And then had the balls to go up and go start playing Nintendo games, which we ourselves never even knew about. But nonetheless, um,
we didn't even know he had access to that.
no, not
Not
at
that
all.
we would have questioned that, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean,
it's struck me since everything David Miscavige does is incredibly deliberate.
yeah. Oh yeah. So what the hell, Claire? Where was I? What because I
So getting
diverted.
back to, we were talking about your mom.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I talked to my mom for about a half an hour, and I'm sorry, everybody, that I jumped off down that path. I
No,
probably
you
got
don't
you
owe anyone
engulfed
an
in my
apology. You know
story,
what?
my
There's a
mom.
lot to talk about, and
Yeah,
we're going to get there
yeah,
eventually.
yeah. Um, Maybe it makes it harder for Osa to keep track.
There you go.
That's why I jump around so much. There's no rhythm and flow to what the hell I have to say. So,
It's all right. We're just
yeah.
having a conversation, and they can
Yeah.
listen and learn or
Yeah.
move along.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Okay. So, chit chat with my mom. It's. I think I remember saying that she didn't even know my birthday. She clearly remembered my sister's birthdays, who she's still in touch with, and they themselves, their kids are in the Sea organization.
Oh,
So the
no.
connection goes deep, and it's not just one kid,
Oh,
but
no.
that's all I last knew before I disconnected. So I haven't related with any of them ever since. But more importantly, my mom's the oldest. I'm afraid of getting a phone call 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months later, whenever someone decides to tell me that, hey, your mom, is no longer with us. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's just a strange thing that I know inevitably is coming. I'm trying to avoid it being caught by surprise to hear
For
about it.
sure.
And then, to be honest with you, it may sound cold hearted, but I don't even know if I'm going to go. I don't know. You get to a time in your life where you start looking at the reality of some things and some
Well,
things.
don't make any decisions just
No,
yet,
I'm not.
and
I'm
we're
not.
here for you. I mean that sincerely.
Well,
That it's just a lot to go through and a lot
it
to process, and I would love to share my thoughts, offline.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And just as a follow up, I did get out of her that she promised that she would accept my calls now, and listen, reestablish our connection, and of course that was on the heels of how did you find me? How did you find me? So
Understood.
I know she's caught up in the old fear factor, the fear factory that she's in, but I have since tried to call her 6 or 7 times, and because she was in a facility, I was calling through the switchboard. Uh, it turned into one time saying, I can't talk to you, I can't talk to you.
Ugh.
Not that she wasn't saying, I don't want to talk to you, I don't
No,
want
of
to talk to
course
you. It
not.
was saying,
She
I
she
can't talk to you, I can't
yeah.
talk to you.
Her first response was the only true one, that she
Correct.
would take your calls.
Yes,
Anything else thereafter is dictated by Scientology
that's
and
right.
her instructions and her fear of consequences. And I'm sorry because that
The
just
fear.
stinks.
Yeah, and so like I was saying, I was calling through the switchboard, and they don't even announce that it's me. It's just they put me through the incoming calls to the room. So
Okay.
she would say hello before, and then it turned into she wouldn't say anything until she would hear the voice, and she would hear it's me, and I go mama, mama, and she would hang up.
Ugh,
And so I was trying to figure out how do I
that's
get
just
around that.
heartbreaking. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, and 6 or 7 times of that is just okay, I can see what's going on here. So, you know, like I said, go fuck yourself, Osa.
Yeah. Do
The
you know
fact
where she is physically, Jackson?
I do, yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, I do. I
Okay.
I mean, a magician doesn't reveal
Yeah, no, I'm not asking you to reveal your
no, I'm
secrets,
not.
sir.
I'm just saying that humorously.
Yeah, I know.
I would tell you, of course, off air, but the only reason I don't say it here is because Osa's looking for any and all indications. So, anyways, that's a quick
So
update on my
thus
mama.
the explanation of your comment that Osa's tactics are alive and well.
Alive and well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So people, you hear this? This is Scientology destroying
Yeah.
families as of
On
last
this
week.
day, February 23rd, 2023, at Pacific time, 1 in the afternoon, disconnection enforcement upon their own religious
Elderly
elderly
members.
members because of someone who speaks out against them is at play, full on, fully. So, um,
Well,
There it
I
is.
appreciate you giving us that update, Jackson. I
Sure.
thank you. And before we get back to where we left off from part one other question I realized I didn't ask about the story you shared so far is you explained how your mother and yourself arrived in Los Angeles and that your sisters had stayed behind to finish out a sports season.
Yes, their soccer seasons.
Yeah, soccer season. What happened with them?
Well, my oldest sister did join staff. And I don't know how the choices were made where they ended up, but my oldest sister went to CMO Pack, and that's where she eventually met her now husband. And they got married back then. And Janice, Janice, Janice's little travel across the U.S. right now. Her and Cheryl.
Yes. Yes.
She saw Justine, the Lipton kids, in Texas.
Okay.
And I just out of the blue got these pictures of my sister at her wedding, in Ferndale Park. If anybody knows LA, you probably remember Ferndale Park up in
I
Los
don't, but
Feliz.
that's okay. I didn't
Yeah.
didn't get around much.
Oh well, it was around Pack.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
uh,
And
up off
again,
of Los
sorry,
Feliz.
backing up 1 second. So your sister joined CMO Pack, which was the messenger organization in LA at the Big Blue buildings. And
That's
how old
correct.
was she when she started?
Well, she was a year older than me, so I guess. And I actually don't even know what year she started. 1980. Yeah, I think it was 1980.
Okay. So she was
So
a teenager.
yeah, so
Okay.
14. She was 15, I guess.
Okay. So she joined this organization at 15 and then got married, and she's still in Scientology to this day, but not in the Sea organization
Correct.
currently.
Correct. No, no, they live down in San Diego.
Okay, but her
And
kids are in the Sea organization.
all but one. One of them is a CHP officer down in San Diego.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
nice.
and he's been there. Gosh, he's a seasoned vet with CHP now. So, and ironically, my dad, being a retired police officer, you would figure he'd want to talk to his grandfather through that career, but because my dad's been connected with me, my dad doesn't get the chance to interact with his grandchildren, and
Wow.
it's yeah,
Again, it's devastating. This
yeah,
is
it's
this is what Scientology does to families. It
yeah,
destroys them
yeah, and but
actively and effectively.
my dad is old school, okay,
Mhm.
and the stuff that comes out of his mouth, I'm surprised he hasn't been arrested. Um,
No.
but his expressed opinion on this, it just constantly, it just grabs at me because he's terribly upset, but he's so happy that he calls me just to tell me what the weather is,
Wow.
just because he can,
Yeah.
and I know that he loves that. So,
And that's amazing. I'm
yeah.
just grateful you were able to reconnect with him.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I sent him and my mom to a Vegas show for Christmas, and to their surprise, I spent the money on some Vegas Cirque du Soleil show
Yes.
in Vegas. And if anybody knows that, that's a pretty pricey price tag. But I didn't. That wasn't my concern. Is I pulled the trigger, bought them, and then I thought, oh my God, they could be out of town. They could be traveling somewhere. I should have figured out in some devious way if they're going to be in town or not.
Uh-huh.
So I buy these tickets because every minute that goes by when you find tickets, then you're online, and every minute that goes by that you don't buy them, someone else is possibly going to buy them. So you're kind of motivated to click away to
Yes.
secure the seats. So, anyways, it turned out that they were available, and they were so happy that they were going to go, and yada. It was pretty cool, pretty
That's
dang cool.
amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, so
And so
so
so we covered your one sister and what happened with your other sister?
my younger sister, I really don't know what happened with her in the SEAL career. She lived around the complex area. I just remember she was a
But
little
she did
troubled.
end up joining the Sea organization as a teenager as well?
Yeah. See, back then there was a big shade of gray where a parent's children could or couldn't be. Like if they didn't show up to the cadet org, it wasn't considered a big deal.
I see.
Um, I don't know what I'm trying to say with that, other than she kind of flip flopped back and forth, more flopped than flipped. Excuse me, to the point where she had her own job. She was living a life, dating guys, so on and so forth. So that's
But
what I
living in Los
but
Angeles?
living in LA.
Oh wow. Okay.
And I didn't know where. I didn't, and again, I didn't associate with my own family.
Yeah.
That the family time didn't involve all of us kids hanging out together. It was me seeing my mom.
So, for all intents and purposes, when you and your mom moved to Los Angeles, your family unit was long gone at that point.
That's right. And I was dragged along with my mom.
Yeah.
And I
Understood.
never
I
saw my
I
dad
just
again.
yeah, and not to backtrack, I just realized when I was going back through my mental notes, I was like, "Oh gosh, we never really touched on that." But so both of your sisters are still in Scientology to this day?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Understood. All right. Well, if you're ready, I'll kind of sum up where we left off last time, and we
Sure.
can continue with part two officially. So, and again, I'll link to part one in the video description. But where we left off, you're 16 years old. It's May 1982, and you're just arriving to the Hemet Base Scientology headquarters to start working there.
Yes. So the night came to jump in the brown van. It was a Ford Econoline 150. No seats inside. Maybe there was one bench seat, but most of the back was open to put the boxes of communication being also transported from LA to Gilman Hot Springs.
For
Um,
management
yeah,
purposes.
yeah,
Yes.
just that's that because they weren't going to send internal communications through the U.S. mail, so they had a courier, an in-house courier, take it back and forth to the base twice a day.
Yes.
Sometimes there were special runs if Dave wanted shit down in LA faster or wanted something brought up faster. Nobody in in LA could have hopped in a car and driven up the Int Base to bring anything. It all had to go to that one hub
Yes.
down in Los Angeles through them and through them only, and then that hub would deliver it somehow, and that people had no idea. So nobody knew where the Int Base was. Even up to the very point in which you're being transported up there, you're not told where you're going and how we're getting there. It's just jump in this van. It was specifically done at night, so you could not get geographical references looking out the windows. And there was no windows. The only windows was the windshield and the front passenger and driver door windows to look out of. Even the rear door panels were blacked out.
Yes. And I apologize. I may have asked you this. Were you able to tell your mom when you were leaving?
I don't remember if I did or didn't.
Okay.
Maybe I did out of excitement. I didn't do it out of obligation. Um, I want to say that I did out of excitement. Um, sadly, I also fell in love with this girl down there. At the time, it was, Hoden. Hoden had a wife and a stepdaughter, and it was that girl that we were pretty locked in. We were very comfortable and loved each other, but I was forced to leave her, and that was just separate.
At 16. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, that
And
developing
and you
heart
were
of
forced
love
to leave her just because you were being reposted at the
promoted.
promoted, yeah,
Yeah,
right, to the headquarters in Hemet,
yeah,
and you couldn't maintain a relationship with somebody not
yeah, and
there.
they don't care.
Right.
They want you. They focus on you. Anything else around you and attached to you has no say.
Right.
So I even had brought it up. What do I do with this? And it's like not our problem.
Wow.
So
Not
and
surprised, but yes, that
yeah,
sucks.
it's just the beginning of breaking one's emotional heartstrings down. Numbing them out,
Right.
being forced to swallow it, being forced to wallow in it. Anyway, so there I was in the van going up to the base. It was at night. Got there at like close to midnight or shortly after midnight. And at the time, there was a old main booth down by the garage. I can only refer to these things as we once did. So, I guess when I create my channel, I'm going to do the best I can to have a map that I can zoom in because I know people have seen aerial view maps of the property, and over the
Yes.
years they changed. But here's me arriving at the Ant Base in May of 1982 when it was still looking like a resort, Gilman Hot
Yes.
Springs. There was nothing built out to look like Scientology weather. So I arrived at the main booth down by the old garage. It was called the Dog Box at the time, and it was just pitch black, single porch light on the front, lighting up the road that the van would pull up to and be lit up, and out we'd get, and we had to check in with the guard. That I remember. Um, And once the van took off and you stepped out of that light, man, it was just a world of silence and darkness, pitch black.
Yes.
It was just spotted with little lights every now and then. But boy, I tell you, the majority feeling was this is a dark, remote place. And I had no idea where I was, but it was also beautiful and serene at the same time. So you loved it, but in the big mystery sandwich was well at play.
Yes. Understood.
So we walked with our luggage, and I had to bring everything that I had. And that's just another little small note that there's no respect or attention given to one's personal belongings, personal concerns, or personal feelings when it comes to meeting the demands of the Sea Organization.
Right.
There's no Jackson's going to go on project to Australia, and he's going to be there for 6 to 10 months or whenever. When you hear that, you know it's going to be forever. And someone else who's planning that does not include what are we going to do is get his belongings over there too.
Right.
It's just Jackson. As long as he's got pants, probably as long as at least he's got underwear and maybe some socks on, he's good enough to go.
Yeah, and the fact is, had you had a spouse, it wouldn't include your spouse either.
That is correct.
Yep.
So, and in some cases, special cases, I'll just jump off the side. That did happen with Walter and
Zara.
What's her name? Zara. Yeah.
Yes.
Because Walter, that just out of respect, Walter. There are some people that knew how to pull those strings to make that kind of stuff happen.
Yeah, and you're putting it very kindly. Walter threw a fit, to which they responded by saying, "Oh, well then, here's Zara. She's going to go with you to Europe for the rest of time." Because had he not thrown that fit, he never would have seen her again.
That's right.
Yeah.
And knowing Walter, that guy, he was a German. He was from Germany or Switzerland or whatever. He had a very,
yes.
The way he looked at you would make you think twice.
Yeah, and for context, nice we're talking about in 1993, roughly, two staff members, Walter and Zara Kotrick, were sent as executives to go man up the Europe management organization. Right. Yeah, and you're right. That was one of the rare examples where the spouse was sent along. Yeah.
See, there's a self-collaborating story right there, Claire. Huh?
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. And Zara, what was Zara doing when that was happening? She was working in the galley just as a regular steward, no management training, no nothing to Sea Org standards.
Yes.
And it was just that Walter wants her, Walter gets her, and we're going to do you one more solid, Walter. She'll be your deputy.
Yes.
And that's what it was.
No, regardless of qualifications, as always, or training or anything, inside or outside of Scientology, here she was being sent as a top executive. She was one of the top probably 10 executives in all of Europe.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And guess where those orders came from was Dave himself.
Right.
So
because as you'll come to see as you listen to all of our stories that we're sharing, David Miscavige runs everything in Scientology.
That's right. Now, because of what we just talked about, reminded me of one perspective I wanted to convey before we really go down this very dark, rugged, ragged rabbit hole called the Int Base.
Yes.
To our listening viewers, I know that some of the things either I say or Claire says or Mark says, but I'm only really speaking on my behalf. I may be talking about stuff that may have really rocked your world at one time. And I'm not saying this for any other reason out of respect for you as an individual, because it's something that I've slowly myself become aware of. And like I was referencing earlier, that some things one says, you don't realize the impact it's having on somebody. And I don't know how to control that or to caress that to make it any easier and deliver it in a more, what I feel should be a precious way. I may speak of these things or reference these things in maybe sometimes a comical sense, throwing some humor into them. And, I realize that that's probably one of those things where it could actually come across as a disrespect to the people that were involved in what I'm referencing at the time, the story that I'm telling. Either my having chased somebody down, which there was at least a couple of hundred souls that I chased after and brought back against their will, or I did things through the practice of sea organization practice or orders that I wasn't even aware of the impact that it had on them as an individual. And I just considered them another cog in the wheel of making things happen. And sadly, to my own benefit and my own image and my own survivability, um, not caring to, again, the impact that it's having on the individuals at play.
Yes.
Um, so,
Though, as we've talked about, and I 100% appreciate everything you just said, as you and I have talked about, first of all, you and I both were trained in carrying out orders from a very young age. That doesn't make it okay.
no.
Second of all, if it wasn't you doing it, Jackson, it would have been somebody else.
Well, that is true. And, but even if it was someone else, I guess I speak on behalf of myself and all of us speaking out in that the purpose of us sitting here and Claire and I, as an example, of having this exchange of information, but we also realized that my last thing was there was 11,000 people that watched. That's freaking daunting to say.
Yes.
Number one, it's easy to sit here and talk, not seeing that audience in front of you, but that's 22,000 sets of ears.
Yes.
Listening.
Yeah.
And that's 11,000 souls that either were or were not in Scientology, but are listening to these very dark, morbid stories.
Right.
And I just find it important and of value to respectfully respect that.
I absolutely agree.
You know?
And you're right. I mean, we lived it,
Yeah.
so it has different impact on people that are hearing these stories for the first
Yeah.
time. That is absolutely a fact.
And in my case, which one of the motivations of creating a YouTube channel, I really have a personal button on doing stuff like this. I'm not, hey, look at me, I've got something to tell you.
Yeah, you and me both, bud.
Yeah, it's very awkward, but I've overridden that concern based off of the responses of the people that are listening.
Right.
Because they found great value in it. And I'm like, well, I'm doing them a disservice by not talking about it.
I understand.
The glorious thing about it is it's the truth.
Yes.
And the truth has changed so much in the morbid culture of Scientology and the Sea Organization, and it hasn't cost us a dime.
Nope.
But they spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars trying to protect that information being exposed, not
Right.
only to the outside world, but to their own people. Because
and even then, even whatever millions they're spending on trying to hide the truth, they are failing to do that.
that's what puts a smile on my face, Claire, in that when I hear these little backstories of, I don't know how they're doing it, but I do look forward to hopefully one day people emailing me and go, hey, Jackson, I remember this, I remember that. Can you help me out?
Yes.
And well, Jackson, here's a little tidbit that I'm happily sitting over here going to course every day or doing something with the church. And then I wish I had I wish I had the opportunities that our viewing listeners have today to be able
Yes.
to play both sides of the coin, Bill will hopefully change something. But nonetheless, I didn't want to get so down this, but I just wanted to respectfully communicate.
Well, you did that very well, so thank you.
Well, thanks. So back to my first day at the base. Again, I had been brought there to help build the Star of California ship. So I was assigned to a berthing down at the G units out near where the flood, and it's more of the eastern end of the property. If you look at any Google Earth map view, you'll see G units referenced on there, and I lived in G10 specifically.
Yeah.
But that's where I was. I remember waking up the next morning. It was during the summer, so it was hot. It was beautiful.
And sorry, since we already talked about the G units, so at that time, that was where staff berthing was. They later became where the celebrities like Tom Cruise would stay on arrival. So we're talking 1982, and we made reference to the G units being where Tom Cruise stayed or was going to be staying shortly in August 1990.
That's correct.
Awesome. All right, carry on. Sorry.
All right, so yeah, we first had a muster in MCI, so that's where I Massacre Canyon Inn, which is basically the main dining facility for that property. And up until this day, Massacre Canyon Inn is referred to as Massacre Canyon Inn. We maintained the building names, carried over the building names as once Scientology took possession of that. So MCI was always MCI. Whenever you think of MCI, you think of eating or an event or a briefing by Dave Miscavige. So
Is it true, by the way, that those names were maintained mainly for local public relation purposes?
nope,
Because no,
no,
okay,
not that I'm aware of.
okay, I was told that it was because of Massacre Canyon being close by, but you never know.
Well, I will tell you this, that you know, when I look back and I knew all the original port captains, um, the base security shore story, um, there was never any mention is you got to call it MCI. We can't call it anything else because we want the outside world to. We don't want to disrupt what the locals have established in their history that this is good old Massacre Canyon Inn.
Okay.
Because that sounds to the uneducated or unknowing ear, Massacre Canyon Inn. Why do you want to use the word Massacre Canyon? Well, in California, has a lot to do with the historic pioneers traveling across. Because that property even was referenced in a Louis L'Amour book, believe it or not,
Mm.
in one of his stories of having come through Gilman Hot Springs and Massacre Canyon. So, but Massacre Canyon refers to a nearby canyon where a massacre took place. And in my firefighting world, which we'll get into later, but one of my old captain, who's now a chief, was hiking up there just a few days ago, and he took pictures of the flowers that were the wildflowers that grew up there that were the reason that started the conflict that led to the massacre.
Wow.
Because even he knows history, and a lot of people take pride in knowing that up there. So
Yes.
I ended up so there. My first morning, go to MCI, and we have breakfast. Breakfast consisted of eggs over easy, however you wanted them, or scrambled eggs and toast, and cowboy coffee, if anybody know what that is. But that's basically where you boil water and then dump a bunch of ground up coffee in it.
Mm.
And you boil it that way. It's just, it's cowboy coffee because it's the way the cowboys made it at the campfires, is they're horsebacking it across the open plains. They didn't have any special Nespresso machines or French
Right.
press. So we had cowboy coffee and not really good creamer and cheap milk, and it was just a very simple basic. But I just remember thinking, "Wow, I'm at the Int Base breakfast. This is how they eat. This is how they roll."
Yeah. Do you
Everybody's
have an idea of how many staff were there when you arrived?
no,
Okay.
no. The people that I was associated with were simply the renovations crew, the facilities crew, whatever you want to call in today's world. But as the people that were assigned, the staff members that were assigned to do the renovations on the ship. So
Okay.
part of that was, I remember the musicians, because Fernando, Terry's husband, Charlie Rush, Ron Sr. was not part of the band. The Tommy Arbuckle, just the musicians, the original musicians, from the Apollo Stars to the original Int Base musicians. They were part of it. I remember Sheldon Musell. I don't know if you remember Sheldon.
I do.
Matt Pesh, Chris Byrne, Rick Asnaran, Ron Clifford. There was just, there was probably a good 30 people that were there at the morning muster. And I remember during breakfast, we had TVs back then, and it was the old bar setting down there. And I remember sitting there eating breakfast and watching 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea was on TV, and that became our morning routine. So when we came in for breakfast, we watched 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea. For lunch, we watched Starsky and Hutch. And for dinner, I forget what it was we watched. And then at 10:30 at night, we watched Saturday Night Live. So we all eventually congregated back of MCI to get some social interaction, and that was a time when we could socially interact with each other. There was a little bit of downtime in between expectancies that we would get to chill and play pool and laugh with each other, and it was nice. So um, we all had the muster, hiked up to the ship, and at the time it was just the buildings that you see now always existed, just in different states. Where the waterfall is on the western end of the pool, um, which has koi fish in it now, that used to be a baby pool, and that was the first thing that I helped take apart. I
Okay.
remember Fernando and Charlie and I. That was our first assignment. So it was hotter than hell. I had an old pair of OP shorts, tube socks, and we none of us wore shirts because it was just so flipping hot. And it was just, it seemed like so 70ish. It's so 70ish of the hard, simple, no frills, hard work, hard labor. Backbreaking
Yes.
stuff. But I was young, and so ironically, within a couple of days of doing that, I was assigned. And from my security history, this would be my first security assignment.
Okay.
Um, After working a few days on the pool, jackhammering and sledgehammering, mostly sledgehammering that pool apart, I was assigned to watch um, what later I came to understand was the beginning of the management uh, taking apart, where Dave was doing his transition. Dave was starting to become large and in charge, I guess, because
Yeah.
I was watching Paul Grady, John Nelson. John Nelson was COC Moet before Mark Yeager was. Carrie Gleason, who was the original ED Int, and who was the other? There was ED Int and Deputy ED Int, or Deputy ED. Carrie Gleason and anyways, I'll remember it later.
Yeah.
And then Kenny Lipton.
Okay. And when
And
you say watch, describe for me
I was
like what
instructed
what
that
did
I
your
am
day look like?
I was instructed that I was assigned to work with these folks because they were being kept separate from the rest of the group, and I had to keep an eye on them and see to it that they didn't leave or go wander away from the tasks that we were assigned.
Okay.
Again, I was what, 15, 16, 15, somewhere in there.
So these guys were in
Full grown
trouble
adults. Yeah,
and doing heavy manual labor, and I'm sure there was a large concern that they were going to try and escape, right?
that's right. And that's why I was assigned to watch them.
Yeah.
Now, as to what that meant and what I needed to do to achieve that, I had no flipping clue, but I knew I was being given a responsibility that was important, and I just had to basically hang out with these guys. And these are all grown adults,
Right.
25, 30 years old.
And
Um,
you're 16.
yes, just
Yeah.
newly bushy tail, bright eyed, new kid at the Int Base. So I don't know what got me or landed me with that position, but nonetheless, there I was. I had the greatest time with these guys. These guys used to bitch up a storm about stuff, and I had no idea who they were bitching about. But man, their dirty mouths and the dirty things they would talk about and how upset they were was just free flowing. I used to laugh my ass off. I didn't even know that it was right or wrong. I was
Yeah.
contributing to joking and jokers and degraders, or people who were bitching about stuff and they shouldn't be. No, these guys, they didn't care. I remember John Nelson. He was all nice and tan. He had a gold chain around his neck. He was kind of suave, but why those guys remained being there, but then they just totally had this go fuck yourself attitude. I don't know, but it was kind of fun
Yeah.
because it was here I was at the Int Base. This is cool that you would never see this down in Los Angeles. Um, and I just had fun with these guys, and they never took off. They certainly
Nice.
hated doing what they did, but we did a lot of shitty jobs out around the ship. So um,
And so were you also the night watch for them, or how did that
no,
work?
I
Okay.
don't know. I don't remember. Maybe
Okay.
I'll remember. I just remember being assigned to them, and I knew Kenny Lipton from when I was down in Los Angeles. Um, I also knew his wife at the time and their kids, because I used to do Kenny's laundry and his wife's laundry and both their kids, Jennifer and Justine's laundry, and And I eventually ended up chasing Kenny because he blew. But that's a story for another time. But here I was, bushy tailed, bright eyed, new one to the base, and having to watch these folks, not having an idea. I became their little, for lack of terms, bitch, in that I would run errands for them.
Oh boy.
They would have me go get more cold ice water. Uh, the canteen we had back then, which was our basically our little shopping center slash convenience store, in-house convenience store. I would be sent to go get them cigarettes, and cigarettes back then were like 25 cents, 50 cents, $1 a pack. But yet they didn't have any money, and it was an honor system canteen. So I used to write all these IOUs
Oh
in
boy.
their name. Yeah, because people would leave IOUs because we weren't getting paid that often, especially someone who was doing deck work. But anyways, I would get them their pack of cools and whatever, and then bring them back. Oh, Paul, yeah, I told you, Paul Grady. Yeah, Paul Grady was part of it too.
Yes.
That I was watching. So, anyways, that was an initial memory that I'm reliving and having to watch. And then I would also found myself, I don't know if someone else replaced me or not, but I would be back and forth working on ship projects. And this was again April, May. So this is probably the first month there. I was watching these folks in May of '82 and doing projects on the ship.
Okay.
And I just remember working my ass off and how much sun I was taking, how tan I got, how bleached my hair became. And at the end of the day, how exhausted I was. It was just incredible how hard I would sleep and all that. Now, this Reynolds project was set up just as that as a project. And in sea organization standards, when you're on a project, it was based off of something that had been written as a plan in a standardized format, and where it would state its mission, purpose, it just had the standardized format that would get followed, where targets would be worked towards to be achieved, targets that had people's names attached to being the one responsible to see to it that target was done, and had to report compliance and evidence of compliance that target was done and all that. So these projects basically entailed who's responsible for all aspects of it, and had accountability attached to each action. So there was these people who were in charge. I remember Matt Pesh was in charge of it at one time. Chris Byrne was in charge of it. Rick Azaran was in charge of it. Jenny Cruzen, if you remember her, and just a Gary Press. We had these T-shirts made up for 82 Renos or something, and this Elridge quote on the back about moving mountains, something like that. There was this whole thing to do about the building of the Star of California, and
Yes.
it was quite an event to be part of. I was there the entire time, from the first time that concrete was broken to begin the project to the final christening of the ship.
Okay. And again, we're talking about the clipper ship that was built in full in the middle of the desert in Hemet, California, or Gilman Hot Springs, California.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And it was specifically being built because L. Ron Hubbard wanted to increase the local area public relations control. It's called PR area control.
Yep.
To because we couldn't exist there without people driving by and wondering what's going on there. So initially, and again, when I first arrived there, maybe I should back up just slightly a bit, because the first day after I was released, you go through a new arrivals routing form, and you get routed to all these various terminals around the base, which included...
By terminals, meaning staff have to do certain steps with you on the routing form for you to officially be someone approved to work there.
Yeah, and the terminals, meaning the person responsible for feeding people, for assigning a room to them, doing your Scientology studies, payroll, and public relations. So you go through all the divisions. And on that routing form even included a clearly stated step to meet L. Ron Hubbard.
Oh.
And to introduce yourself and see him. And it was kind of a unique thing that eventually that would happen. And why it was included on that, I think, was done at his directive. So he would receive a written statement that that I was there, or whoever new arrival would be at the base. So
But he wasn't there at that
no,
time. Okay.
no, he definitely wasn't.
Yep.
I got, I found out later that there was times that he was there, and I didn't even know it yet. I was in security, but nonetheless.
Interesting.
So I did that routing form. I remember that specifically. And you have to get introduced to the security measures and procedures and requirements. What the short story is. The short story is basically the white lie that we would tell everybody inquiring about that location of what we were all about.
So if somebody asked you when you were out shopping in Hemet, for example.
Out shopping? No, it's just simply yeah. We never went out shopping.
I know. I know. I'm just saying it wasn't for other staff. It was for people local to Gilman Hot Springs. And what was it at that time?
At that time, it was we are here working for a man who bought this property as an investment, and we are the caretakers.
Okay.
There was no reference to Scientology. We were specifically instructed not to wear uniforms. There was to be no reference to Scientology whatsoever, and no mention of Scientology. And just that we were caretakers of a man who was investing in this property. And that
Understood.
Was it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was maintained for a while. It was a very crude security system. There, for the majority part, there was no fence around the property whatsoever. And in fact, I don't want to go down that path just yet because that's getting off to where I was going, which is the building of the clipper ship.
Okay.
But I do remember going through that security process that the base itself was not well secured. Not that it was a distraction. It was very open, very open.
Right. Unlike later when it became surrounded by razor wire and so forth.
And
motion sensors and floodlights and.
Yeah. See, you're talking about stuff that I saw too. I had to research, develop, and install.
Yeah, we'll get there. It's all good.
People talk about it as an insult. Like, it kind of hurts, but in a weird sense, I just thought he'd comically mention that.
Yeah.
You call it razor wire, I call it elderberry, and I specifically got it so it wasn't as intimidating, and it didn't have that razor wire impact on people. But nonetheless, we'll talk about it later. See, never knew the effects of my actions.
Right. I understand.
So there I was, young, and I did my writing for my first day at the ship. Was working on the baby pool, and within a week, I found myself watching people, and those people were just a joy to watch and all that. So I would say from April, May, June, July, August, September, I would say close to October. Maybe it was in October. I don't know exactly. See, I only remember stuff by what was happening at the time.
I understand.
So the US Festival was going on somewhere in there. And I don't know if I was working on the ship for 6 months or 6 weeks. It was a very tightly run, heavily run affair. In that it was being worked on full time. There was a lot of detail to it. A lot of detail to make sure that the building looked like a clipper ship. The outside of it looked like what a clipper ship would look like. To the details of having lifeboats on it, real lifeboats, the decking, the handrails, the rigging, the blocks, the roping, the masts. Everything was to be legit. Like real masts were brought in, real yard arms, real roping blocks from a ship that you would find. Everything that could be real placed on a building was either made or adjusted to fit the building, and it did look like a clipper ship. It just,
yep.
We
and
had
does to this day.
Yeah, and it does to this day. Had a big ship's wheel on it for steerage. Had a bow. Didn't have the conventional. It was to made me look like an old original clipper ship, not a modern day with the lighting on the port lights. Maybe there was. I don't remember there being port lights, starboard and port lights lighting on it for navigational. Yeah. I don't think there was a red. Maybe there was. Maybe there was a red light and a green light. Maybe I think there was. And then we asked the security. Eventually, we had raised and lowered the flags every day, the ship flags. I don't know if you remember that, but that was part of security's detail. Where we had to climb up there and raise and lower the flags every day.
I did not remember that.
Sunrise and sunset. But that became later of an action of mine. But so there I was involved with the ship, just doing all sorts of detail, grueling work, hardcore. And I even remember during that time, we used the pool that's still there to this day as a soaking pool that we would put the logs in, that we used to do some of the landscaping for there was the ship that was made to look like it was docked in a Polynesian dock. So the where around the pool had the cabanas, and it had the waterfall with the koi fish in it that was installed by the same gentleman that did the Japanese garden up at the original L. Ron Hubbard house at Bonnie View.
Okay.
He came out and he was the one that had all the rocks artistically placed in that to give that water. I don't know what I'm trying to define it as, but basically a Japanese artist came out to recreate a Japanese koi pond with a waterfall through the use of rocks that we pull off the mountain.
Okay.
And that was labor intensive, because I remember going up there and manhandling these rocks to get them on the backhoe to bring them down. And this guy would look them over and say, let's use this one, let's not use that one. He would actually go up into the mountains himself and pick the rocks out of the hills that we would end up hauling down, and he would have them placed. And sometimes you spend an hour placing one rock.
Wow.
He was
And
really-
again, you're still 16 at this time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And so what was the next major significant shift, and
Okay,
roughly
so-
when that you remember?
When the ship was done, which is a big ordeal and many relatable stories. Oh, that's where during the ship also, and this is where Janice comes into my life. In that Janice was on the decks at the time. Her and Paul, I don't know for what reason, but they were down there working with us on building the ship. And Janice,
And on
for
the
those
decks,
who don't
meaning
know-
she had been taken off her position for some unknown reason. She was in trouble, so she was doing heavy manual labor.
That's correct.
Okay.
And it was also, I got to know Janice, and then I also got to know Shelly then too, because Shelly for a time was doing mess work. We'll get that into that part of that experience when we talk about Shelly.
Sounds good. And we're talking about Shelley Miscavige,
Miscavige,
David Miscavige's wife.
His wife, yes.
Yeah.
So I cut myself with the skill saw. I picked up a skill saw. It was a Milwaukee Sidewinder skill saw, and it had no blade guard on it. And I picked it up by the trigger, hit the trigger, and it walked it into my left hand, and it sunk the blade just down to my bone in my left hand.
Ouch.
And next thing I know, there was blood squirting everywhere, all over me, all over. And I remember Liz Ingber was screaming, and Paul and Janice were right there. Paul knew exactly what to do because he had medical training, and he put compression on it, and he took care of me. I didn't go to the hospital. I should have gone to the hospital.
Yep.
But I didn't.
But as is common practice there, they don't take the standard agreed upon protocols
Yes.
for medical emergencies.
Yes. Albeit I will eventually relate to the story, but because I helped break down that barrier, there was a time where we would utilize 911, but that was a short window.
Yes.
So there I found myself with the cut hand, and Paul just took care of me. He bleeding, believe it or not, actually cleans a wound. So he let myself bleed to completely clean it out, because there was no first aid kit, there was no OSHA standards, there was nothing.
Right.
Didn't rush me off to the MO's office.
And you're using skilled construction tools for which you have no formal training either. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Wow.
I did when I was down in LA, but no official. I mean, I was just 16 years old, 15,
Right.
16 years old. To the Sea Org standards.
Thank
once
God it
you-
wasn't worse than what it was.
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, like into my thigh, which happened with someone else later. But yes, it could have been worse. It wasn't. But nonetheless, I just remember burp, burp, burp. It was just pumping away, and Paul put direct pressure on it and helped me treat it. And I remember going to bed that night. I had a dressing on it, and his key thing was using vitamin E. So he gave me a handful of vitamin E, liquid vitamin E, that I would just constantly keep it moistened with.
Yes.
To let it naturally heal. Even though it was deep, like literally I could see the bone.
Oh,
I never didn't hit the bone. I just took that much meat out and cut that deep. I could
wow.
see the bone, and it healed from that point. So I never lost any feeling and all that. So
Thank
yeah, I guess
goodness.
the church can say that. Yeah, they still handle it correctly. I didn't. Yeah, whatever.
No, they can't say that.
No, they can't. Um, sorry.
I've talked to enough people since leaving, even just about the accident I had where I broke my leg so severely I almost lost my foot. And people in the real world, doctors, emergency personnel, they get so, so mad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, back to your
That's
story.
so okay. So the ship took place. I partook in that thing. In the course of that, there was brush fires on the hill. There was these interesting musters. That was also the time when TVs were removed from our berthings. That place was loaded. You know, one strange thing is when the church bought something back then, such as Cedar Sinai, the big blue building, what it is today, was an old hospital. The church buys Gilman Hot Springs, an old resort. The prior owners just upped and left. They didn't move much shit out at all.
Yes.
Cedar Sinai, they left a lot of bonuses down there, corpses on gurneys,
Oh my
little
gosh.
surprises and
Seriously,
stuff.
I did
Yeah,
not know that.
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't like hundreds of them, but I do remember hearing that there was at least two,
Wow.
and then yeah, and then all it was just all the old gurneys and the oxygen connections and the every room had its own standardized setup back then, and it was just full of that stuff. And then Gilman Hot Springs was full of resort stuff. So we had the motels, we had the TVs, the lounge chairs, all the dining room tables down at the MCI, the old glasses. You remember these kind of things, you know, the smoky brown, multi-faced glasses, something that you would find at a old school garage sale. Someone
Mm,
in glasses from the 70s. You know, you go, hey, that's from the 70s.
yes.
And
And
we had,
and and just as an additional comment, so it became while it was okay for you to watch TV when you first got there, they were banned and
right.
subsequently removed, so no Sea Org members could watch television.
And I specifically remember that day that happened because we were mustered up. We were all brought together, and we were informed. We were read this L. Ron Hubbard advice, and it was
Yes.
it was the new L. Ron Hubbard policies without being on green on white, and
Yes.
also with no direct reference to L. Ron Hubbard, but we all knew because he signed his with the star, and we therefore referred to him as Star.
Yes. And again, this was because he was being searched for and he was trying to present like he wasn't managing Scientology when of
That's
course
right.
he was. He just changed the format so everyone knew he was still managing, but for
Yeah, it's
face
almost
sake, it was a delusion.
it's almost like we're clear. I mean, people talk about the whole. The whole has always existed, just in
Right.
different formats,
Yes, that's right.
in different states. It has
Yep,
always existed.
absolutely.
So don't think that that's a new thing. So
No.
that same concept that the hole's always existed. Well, short stories have always existed, and the ever changing covering your ass uh, changed. In that's how L. Ron Hubbard avoided direct direct involvement with church operations, but he still wanted to have direct involvement with church operations. So
Right.
they just changed things up.
Yep.
And that's how he was referred to if written documents was Star, and
Right.
he never signed stuff. So um, we were all brought in, and we read these things that there was this advice on televisions, and LRH explained how televisions create zombies, and they have impact on the people watching, and therefore we're going to eliminate TVs.
Right.
And how specific, I'll never remember, I'll never forget. There was a moment of silence, and you hear this hand raised up in the back. Someone goes, "Yeah, you," and you hear Martin Reed going, "What about the fucking Super Bowl?"
Oh,
that
that's
was
amazing.
that was so cool. Like, we can't watch cartoons in the Super Bowl anymore.
Right.
You know, it's not like we robotically accepted it. We definitely had our questioning of, can we still watch this? What about Starsky and Hutch? What about Saturday Night Live?
Yeah.
So,
And in reality, I don't believe it had anything to do with staff becoming zombies. I think it had to do with isolating and cutting off any outside sources of
External
information.
influences, that's right.
Yes.
And access to outside information, that's correct.
Yes.
And I'll never forget, it took a while for them to get all the TVs because they didn't tell us to go get your TV and bring it in. They actually assigned some people to go out and collect them.
Yes.
So I lived in the garage house, which was a building next to the main garage outside of the perimeter. It was just referred to as a garage house because of the house next to the garage. And I lived there with Uwe and Charles Johnson and Martin Reed and somebody else. And we were all in there watching TV one night. We used to watch the Benny Hill show.
Okay. Yep.
And you know, the goofy stuff. I'll never forget. I think the intro was going at the time when that project came in the garage house.
Oh no.
And we're just sitting there watching TV. No words were exchanged. They just came in, unplugged it, grabbed the antenna, picked the TV, and walked out. And we just looked at each other and goes, "Well, there's the end of that."
Oh man.
And that was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for therever, we never watched TV again. So
Okay.
up until MCI was built later on. But so, okay, so once I was done with that, I'm so itching wanting to Google when the US Festival was, because I think that was in the summer of 82 or early 83. No, it had to have been before, because I was in security.
Well, that's all right. Just roughly is fine. So I'm presuming then what, so you finish the project, what happens next in terms of
Now, during the course of that, I was also partaking in these staff assigned watch duties, where there was always watching. You know, there was always a security measure that was in place. It was very, very general, very loose back then, but nonetheless, there was the main security booth that I don't know how that came about, but that was the headquarters of the security operations. But it was composed of all staff donating their time, or in yours and I's understanding, it was a watch quarter station bill assignment.
yes.
Which was the second duty assigned, second responsibility of all Sea Org members, that you always had a WQSB or watch quarter station bill.
And
Watch
so
being,
and in layman's terms, that's really, you have a shift of this extra duty where you're standing
right.
guard as a security guard on the property in addition to whatever your normal assigned duty is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could be a dishwasher, and you'd also have a WQSB assignment. And as long as you were aware of it, you had to move off your dishwashing and go hold watch somewhere.
Yes.
And some people had day watch, some people had night watch, but it was only like 3 or 4 people. We patrolled the property on old Schwinn bikes. We had these old CB radios with 6-foot antennas that you would pull out.
Yep.
And there was a basket on the front of the bike with a pillow or foam in it that would we could put the radio in, and it would take the impacts and bouncing around, or we slung it over our shoulders. Very crude. But I went from the ship to Cine, the cinematography, the filming department of Gold. It was very crude, very new back then.
Okay.
It was probably the transition from the time period of, you know, if you Google Miscavige, you'll see him standing next to a camera in L. Ron Hubbard.
Yes,
You
I've
know,
seen that
days
picture.
with his
Yep.
arms up like that, with
Yes.
his mustache and his long hair and all that. Where he was the cameraman, you remember seeing Marcus sitting there adjusting the focus on the camera.
Yes,
Those
Marcus
stage photos.
Swanson.
Yeah, Marcus was still in the part of the shoot crew, but it was a very original formative stages of the shoot crew. And the Cine studio had already been built. It was existing. So I became part of the Cine crew. I worked in sets and props.
Okay.
I worked with Dave Long and Jim Pettigrew. We used to always have the saying where we had humps and black beauties, which was coffee and cigarettes.
Okay.
Humps being Camel non-filters, and black beauty was black coffee straight up.
Okay.
We used to have that every morning. And we did sets and props. I learned a lot of the trade. It was so much fun. And we were shooting this series called Get Your Feet Wet, which is something that L. Ron Hubbard had established, that we would recreate Rod Sterling or the Twilight Zone episodes.
Okay.
We would get told to look up this episode, and then we would have to reshoot it ourselves and recreate it to match that perfectly.
Huh. Okay.
So, and then we would submit it to L. Ron Hubbard, who would critique it and then give us back a critique, whether we passed or failed. And in most cases, we failed. The critique would come back. We'd go to cramming. Somebody that would correct us on, they would review our actions and determine what it is we need to either restudy or redo or actually study to learn more of, to then go back and give another effort at remaking that. So it was a lot of fun, I got to say. It was fun, and then, again, I'm still running around as a 15, 16-year-old bright-eyed, bushy-tailed over the rainbow in the Int Base doing fun things.
Yep.
You know, it was all fun. It was just so much fun. Living out in the desert, no uniform. You know, it was over the rainbow. I got to say.
No parents.
No
no
parents.
school.
Yeah, living with the adults.
Yep.
Yeah. And I wasn't even aware that it was not school and all that.
I know. I'm just adding a comment because I have teenagers, so you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Mom here saying, "Hey, wait a minute."
Yes. And I'm missing so many little fun details, but I guess that'll be what the purpose of my channel will be, to save you the time of listening all these details.
Yeah,
but,
you have stories for days. We're not
stories for days.
We wouldn't be able to cover it all even if we tried.
Because my point is just leading up to what led up to the security, my engrossment in the security world of the Int Base.
Yes.
So the US Festival happened, and then at the end of the US Festival, there was some sort of incident that happened that I wasn't necessarily aware of, or something was coming down the pipeline that the church was preparing for. So there was 2 security guards established at the base at the time, Kenny Siebold and Matt Pesh.
Okay.
They actually were uniformed in generic khaki shirt with just a blue and yellow patch that said security on it. They actually got official radios. We moved off the CBs and had our own dedicated radios, and everybody in the real radio world, radios had these crystals back then that allowed them to transmit frequencies. So if you dropped them, you stood the chance of breaking a crystal, and you had to get a new crystal. So they're kind of fragile devices at the time, and we used to break them all the time. So, but that was actually when we first got flashlights to carry around. We got a crude motorcycle because we were otherwise running around the property responding to alarms on foot.
Yeah. So you were assigned as an actual security guard.
I was actually,
that was your full-time.
Determined. We're going to put together a security force. Who are we going to pick?
I see.
And Jackson was one of them because for whatever reason, I was probably one of 5 people that was made up of the initial security force.
Okay. Understood.
And
perhaps for this episode, you can tell me one of your craziest first story experiences as a security guard, and then we can wrap up for today.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it's kind of weird when you start bringing that in because I'm back in 1982.
Yes.
Running around that property. It's just a mindset thing. It's really.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about security for a bit here. We haven't even made it past May 82. Mind you, I sideswiped it with some additional questions at the beginning.
We do that,
My bad.
We do that pretty damn well.
So yeah, let's finish up with what was your first crazy experience that you remember now that you're a full-time security guard at the
I will say also that part of the reason the security of that property was put into place, such as putting fences and alarm systems, was there was a theft that happened at the maintenance man's house, which was a building between Massacre Canyon and the ground shed that the maintenance man for the golf course lived.
Yes.
And it was turned into a recording studio, and in it was a lot of equipment, and there was over $400,000 worth of equipment that was stolen out of there one night.
Wow.
So L. Ron Hubbard, he did not want fencing around that property. He specifically wanted it to be low profile and open and free. And not so, I mean, that was a written statement by him. Do not make it look like a compound. But when that happened, that upset him. He said, unfortunately, we're going to have to put fencing up. So put fencing up, but make sure that it is low profile.
Okay.
So we put the black wrought iron along the highway in very short sections, and then progressively put chain link fence around the property. And then part of that growing up, there was underground sensors that were installed. Underground sensors being microphones, and that was very crude, high maintenance. We had gopher troubles all the time. So once that's all in play, and I'm trying to remember from that any interesting grotesque.
What was the first time you were involved in trying to recover somebody who had tried to escape?
Well, as far as I can remember, the first one was Rick Cruzen,
Okay.
where we were all piled in an org car, and I had to go off to Riverside at a bus station. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. We were told we needed to go find Rick Cruzen. So,
Yeah. Ironic
if
that Rick Cruzen's still there. I think
yeah,
he's up to having tried to escape 6 times now.
yeah,
And even more ironically, in Mark's book, Blown for Good Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology, Mark talks about the fact that the only reason security saw him so immediately when he started trying to escape is because they had somebody positioned outside the house next door to watch Rick Cruzen.
right.
Anyway, go ahead. So
Claire,
Rick
there was so
Cruzen,
much
his
batshit crazy. There was people that dug under the fence, that hopped over the. I mean, yeah,
yes,
um, yeah.
jumped the fence. There's
Jumped the
people that
fences.
fell in a ditch and failed to escape because of
Yeah.
that.
Just
Yeah.
yesterday, I was talking to somebody who was actually spent time with a hacksaw cutting through my uh, defense system of blocking underground what am I saying, flood channels.
Wow.
Yeah, and it took him a few days to work through those. But I'm looking back, going, God, I never noticed that on my daily inspections. But anyways,
Wow.
I actually spent time cutting steel to gain himself an access point to get out.
Yeah.
Um,
So
so
Rick Cruzen escapes, and you all hurl into a car to go get him back.
yeah, it was like late afternoon, early evening. I found myself driving out to river, the bus station. I didn't know where the hell we were going. I didn't know if we take a left or take a right. So I was just a passenger going along with an assignment. And we eventually somehow found him, and he obviously got brought back because he's still there. But that's my
Yes.
first. It was not that as detailed as it is now. Which I eventually developed this thing called the blow drill,
Yes, and
and
we'll
that was
cover
out of
that in our next
necessity. Yeah, but
episode.
I can't believe that I developed that. But anyways, that was my first thing. Security wise, um, I can only tell you that the first one was where I actually almost killed somebody. I actually had a gun, loaded gun, safety off, pointed at him, thinking in my head, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head as this guy's approaching me.
And
And this
who was the guy approaching you?
it turns out that it was a hired PI that Marty set up because Dave wanted to test the security guards. He wanted to test our loyalty and the effectiveness of the security system. And I don't think he took into account the fact that we carried guns. And
Right.
it was
And
his
this was
directive.
much later, correct?
Much later.
Yes.
But, you asked me that question, the first thing to come to mind, because you never forget the time when you actually have a loaded gun pointed at somebody with safety off, and you're sounding off in your head, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head.
I can imagine.
I literally had my
I've never
finger on the
shot a
trigger.
gun, but I can imagine.
Well, I had mentally resolved myself that I'm about to shoot somebody, and I remember clearly thinking, this is being done in defense of Scientology.
Wow.
Dave Miscavige.
Yeah.
There was kind of 2 aspects of it I remember, and I'm not adding any color to this because hindsight's 2020.
Right.
I specifically remember this in my head. I'm doing this because I am protecting those that I have loyalty to, and Dave Miscavige, COB's right over there. That's RTC offices, and I'm going to get in trouble if I don't. So it was a
Right.
mixture of those thoughts.
Yep.
But clearly, I had a 45, and the 45s were loaded, mind you. For those in the gun world, you have hollow points and you have regular loads. And we had learned from our PIs that would come in and train us that you load a gun with that in mind. We loaded it so the first 2 rounds would be the slugs, and then the rounds thereafter would be with the purpose to tear, and the hollow points, the hollow points serving their purpose.
Okay.
So the first 2 shots would be giving the person a chance to stop and realize what they're doing and not continue advancement to you. The third one was obviously to kill
I see.
and do maximum damage. So our guns, we loaded them like that. We didn't just randomly put rounds in the clips. We loaded them so they would end up that way. First 2 rounds we knew were slugs, and the third one would be hollow points, and every shot thereafter would be a hollow point.
I see.
Kind of a grotesque thing as a church member, huh?
Yeah, but you know what? It's the life we lived, and again, that's why we're here educating people. And well, with that, Jackson, we'll wrap up for today. You're amazing. I really appreciate you sharing your story with everybody and for joining me to do this.
Well, sure, Claire, and I really respect and admire the fact that there's people out there actually believing what we have to say is the truth, because that is simply what it is, of the truth,
Right.
and not buying into the fact that it's anything other than the truth. But see, that's the good trickery of it all, is those people, or the fear that you have in your life, that you may have in your life, about shedding off of your back of being your own self and being open about the fact that you're no longer part of Scientology. It's an imagined fear that really doesn't exist, but it's what the church relies on, and you having that fear about yourself, that if you do speak out, that they will make your life miserable. Well, you know what? There is no fear. The truth is beautiful.
Yep, the truth will
truth
set
is
you free.
beautiful. The truth
Don't
truly,
grant them the power of accrued leverage over you.
That's right.
Live your best life, and yeah.
And although I understand your considerations to it, just hopefully through what Claire and I and Mark and everybody else and Mike do, that we're providing a safer path for you to reach that one day, of feeling comfortable, of being able to be you. And just like you choose to go work at In-N-Out and no longer at McDonald's, it's the same thing. It's, I'm done working in Scientology or being involved in Scientology. I just choose no longer. You should have the freedom to freely move on from it.
Yes. Well said.
The official alarm.
Well said.
For us to move on. Yeah.
Despite my best efforts to have do not disturb.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to the 26 degrees, and we got like almost a foot of snow here.
Nice.
Last night. So, yeah.
Well, stay warm. Thank you again for everything you shared with us today. And until next time.
Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.